I was reviewing supplier contracts in a quiet glass office when I heard him yelling at the receptionist again. It wasn't just the volume, it was the tone, that sharp entitled bite I'd learned to decode over the past few weeks. Logan Greaves didn't believe in waiting, especially not for people he considered beneath him. I'm Mark Ellison. I'm 47, and until last Thursday, I was the Director of Strategic Partnerships at Arctic, a mid-sized SaaS company that services Fortune 500 supply chains. Or, at least I thought I was. Technically, I'm still employed. But after what happened, let's just say my badge still scans, but the meeting invites stopped cold. It's funny how fast everything shifts. One minute, you're fielding a $12 million onboarding proposal from Eastbridge Global. The next, you're called into a closed-door meeting with HR and told to take a few weeks to reflect on your recent decisions. Except, I hadn't made any decisions. I'd followed protocol-documented violations, flagged inconsistencies in access logs, and asked a simple question during last Friday's leadership sync. Why was Logan granted full admin access to the CRM without security clearance? That question got me sidelined. Logan Greaves is the 24-year-old son of our CEO, Thomas Greaves, fresh off a half-finished MBA and dumped into a strategic innovation role that never existed before he arrived. He wore his last name like armor, swinging it through every hallway conversation like a blunt object. I stayed out of his way as long as I could, but when a vendor flagged a data overwrite that could have cost us a seven-figure client, I stepped in, quietly, professionally. I thought we'd handle it through policy. I was wrong. The email that hit my inbox just after midnight wasn't from legal. It wasn't even from my direct supervisor. It was from Thomas himself. No greeting, no context. Just a forwarded message chain between Logan and HR, and one sentence from the CEO. Mark, let's give this some breathing room. Effective immediately. I sat there staring at that screen for a long time. Not because I was surprised, but because they were sloppy. See, this wasn't the first time I'd seen something like this. But it was the first time I was ready. Logan had been escalating. Unauthorized edits in the CRM, Slack messages that disappeared, invite-only strategy sessions that bypassed compliance entirely. I'd been collecting them for weeks, not out of paranoia, but out of habit. That quiet, careful habit you develop after 20 years in tech, when you've seen how quickly stories get rewritten. And this time, I had the receipts. Before I go on, if you've ever watched entitlement override everything you've built, just drop a like or a comment. I need to know I'm not the only one. Because here's what they didn't know. Thomas thought he was protecting his son. Logan thought he was untouchable. HR thought I'd walk away quietly. But what none of them realized is that the policy Logan weaponized to get me suspended. It worked both ways, and I knew exactly where it lived in a version history they hadn't scrubbed. I'm not here to rant. I'm here to tell the truth, quietly, completely. Because what came next wasn't just a fight. It was an audit, and I wasn't the one who failed it. By the time they suspended me, I already had a folder called Logan Failures, internal. It wasn't spite. It was just pattern recognition. Like watching someone juggle knives with their eyes closed and knowing eventually one would land wrong. I'd seen this dance before, only this time, it wasn't just showboating. He was making changes, dangerous ones. The first real flag came 3 weeks before that midnight email from Thomas. A client pinged me directly, Vanessa Jordan from Eastbridge. She asked why someone named L. Greaves had overwritten her team's permissions in the sandbox environment. I blinked at the message for a second, not because I was surprised he'd touched it, but because the sandbox was isolated for onboarding only. He wasn't supposed to be in there at all. I checked the logs. Full access, admin credentials, no MFA timestamp. Just clean access granted from our CTO's credentials, except our CTO was in Portugal that week and nowhere near a laptop. That was the first time I screenshotted something. The next came 2 days later. I was off-site at a vendor lunch when I noticed an invite disappear from my Outlook. I thought maybe I'd declined it by accident. But when I checked the calendar version history, the meeting wasn't just removed from my list, it had been edited. My name stripped out at the guest field, but the subject line still read, Client Restructure, Ellison Strategy. He didn't even bother changing the title. That's when I knew Logan wasn't just impulsive, he was careless. And carelessness is loud in enterprise systems. You can delete messages from Slack, but you can't delete admin access reports. You can ghost people in meetings, but audit trails always tell a better story. So I started saving things. Not in anger, not even in fear, just as insurance. You see, Logan didn't realize how visible he was. He thought strategy meant whiteboards and jargon. He never understood the architecture. There was one moment that sticks with me. We were in a budget sync. Logan was walking through a deck on expanding influence touchpoints, or some meaningless term like that. He had this smug little grin, like he thought we were all impressed. I asked a simple question. How does this proposal comply with our vendor neutrality clause in section 4.2? He blinked, smiled, and said, "That's above your clearance, Mark. Above my clearance." I wrote it down verbatim as soon as the meeting ended, not because it offended me, because it confirmed what I already suspected. He had no idea how any of this worked. He wasn't hiding the knife. He just didn't think I'd bleed. Over the next week, I watched as he tried to streamline onboarding by bypassing compliance approvals. He removed Angela Rowe, our compliance manager, from a Slack thread and added his own Gmail to the doc sharing settings. No approval chain, no DLP check. Angela didn't even notice. She was buried in a partner audit, but I noticed, and I exported the share history. Every time Logan tried to clean his trail, he left a new one. Because systems don't lie. Only people do. I didn't say anything, not yet. I just built the timeline. Each incident stitched together like pixels sharpening into something undeniable. He was constructing a narrative. I was just collecting the timestamps. There was even a moment I considered walking away, letting them spiral. But then Logan did something I couldn't ignore. He downgraded access for Vanessa's team at Eastbridge without notice and triggered a compliance alert. It was buried under 6 other lower priority pings, but I'd set up a filter months ago to catch anything labeled external role mismatch. I read the flag, checked the version, and saw his name again. Only this time, he didn't use the CTO's credentials. He used his own. It wasn't just an error. It was logged traceable and clearly unauthorized. And I didn't need to dig anymore. I just needed him to keep digging because he was 2 approvals away from triggering something he couldn't erase. They said it like a favor. "Mark, we'd like to give you time to think. No pressure, just consider your options." Angela from HR said it gently, but there was a look in her eyes like she already knew what my decision should be. Like this wasn't a conversation, just a final courtesy. That was the moment it turned. I walked out of that conference room with a printout of the voluntary separation discussion points in one hand, and something colder forming behind my ribs. Not rage, just clarity. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't wrong. They were prepping to clean house, and they wanted it to look polite. A week earlier, I'd noticed Logan's name had quietly appeared on the admin permissions log for our Salesforce instance. He shouldn't have been there. He didn't know the first thing about GDPR sandbox protocols, let alone multi-layered client tagging. But there it was. Permission escalated L. Greaves, access level 4, timestamp 1803 EST. No ticket, no request, no documentation, just manual override. I screenshotted it, saved it to a folder named Compliance Exceptions 2025, and kept working like I didn't see a thing. A few days after that, I was CC'd on an internal thread about client tier downgrades. Logan had pitched a consolidation strategy to the board, fewer service tiers, more automation. It sounded good on a slide deck. Looked aggressive, scalable, except it completely violated 2 high retainer contracts. Those clients had 18-month protection clauses baked in. They were guaranteed certain SLAs, and early termination without board approval would trigger penalty clauses. I had helped write those terms. I replied with one polite sentence. Recommend we recheck retention clauses under Addendum 3A before proceeding with restructuring. Silence. Then the thread disappeared, moved to a private Slack channel I no longer had access to. I requested access back. Denied. Angela called me the next day, said it wasn't disciplinary, just some temporary bandwidth redistribution, while the new leadership explored strategic options. And I nodded. I said I understood, because I did. They wanted me to walk out quietly so Logan could keep bulldozing through 6 layers of governance without a single grown-up watching. I drove home with the windows down that evening. Seattle air still held a sting in February, the kind that keeps you awake. And I remember asking myself, not out loud, but deep down, at what point does staying quiet become complicity? That night, I pulled up my private backup, not the company OneDrive folder, the one they knew about. No, the one they didn't. I opened my notes from last November. The dinner meeting with our largest client, where Logan had shown up late, pitched a half-baked AI solution, and misspoke about their data privacy obligations on a hot mic. I still had the transcript, time-stamped, logged. And I realized something: I didn't have to fight Logan. All I had to do was wait for him to step into the light. He was sloppy, arrogant, the kind of man who thought the rules were furniture meant to be rearranged or ignored entirely. A week later, Vanessa, one of our client liaisons, called me on my personal line. She didn't say much, just, "Hey, I heard something. Internal changes. You might want to check Addendum 3C on the Northwell account." I thanked her, hung up, and then I opened the contract. And right there, highlighted in yellow from my original markup, was a clause Logan had either ignored or deleted. Any reduction in service tier requires 30-day written notice and board majority vote. Failure to comply constitutes breach and will nullify all arbitration protections. I sat back, breathed, and for the first time since this all began, I smiled. Because Logan hadn't just overstepped, he'd broken something sacred. He'd removed the shield his father had built to protect him. And now all I had to do was pull the right thread. What Logan didn't know, what they all didn't know, was that the breach he triggered wouldn't just affect one account. It would open the door for a cascading review, internal, legal, external. And I had every document, every Slack log, every missed approval trail. They thought they suspended me, but what they actually did was give me uninterrupted time. Time to finish the file. And time is a dangerous gift when you give it to the wrong person. And I was the wrong person. It started with a draft I never intended to send, titled Anonymous Policy Violation Report, Form 4B. I created it on a personal device, stored it off network, mirrored it on a secure Proton Drive folder under an alias. I didn't even attach evidence yet, just structured it like muscle memory. I knew our compliance framework inside out. Addendum 3C Clause 7.4, Internal Arbitration, Privilege Escalation, Sequence Tiers. Logan violated 3 before his third day ended. But I waited. It wasn't time to move, not yet. My department had been through 3 mergers and 2 layoffs in 8 years. People who lasted that long learned not to flinch at first blood. You watched, you listened. You waited until the bullet had a name on it and a trail to who fired it. So instead of launching a complaint, I opened Slack. Not to confront him, just to observe. Logan wasn't subtle. He dropped comments in our Unstyle pre-launch dev channel like, "Do we even need legal? Slowing this down?" He bypassed the Jira approval flow, pushing a patch into our production notes with 0 compliant sign-off. I archived everything, screenshotted Slack threads, copied logs. But the mistake that really made my skin prickle came from someone else. Angela from Risk flagged a pricing restructure in a shared channel and CC'd me casually. "Mark, can you confirm third-party vendor clauses match new tiers? Logan signed off already." I froze. Vendor clauses had to go through Risk and Legal twice. He wasn't authorized, not even conditionally. He had pushed through a pricing tier change that had contractual implications across 5 active SaaS clients and did it with no record of compliance review. I responded lightly. "Thanks, Angela. Just reviewing. Quick question. Where was the tier model approved? Can you forward me Logan's sign-off trail?" She answered fast. "We didn't get one. He just said exec override during stand-up." I sat back. There it was, the phrase, exec override, no trail, no timestamp, no backup. In our system, an exec override had to be logged in the ECR Executive Change Registry, with a 2-signature policy CTO or general counsel must co-sign. I searched. Nothing. That night I built the mirrored doc. I included Slack threads, screenshots, email digests, internal change logs. I cross-referenced with our internal audit compliance tracker. Every piece lined up into something dangerously elegant, quiet, clear, irrefutable. I even attached the system metadata in the complaint. Attached, SaaS prod, audit trail, change exec override, Logan Morris, 4.3. 25 missing. It wasn't malicious, not yet, but it was surgical. One day I told myself I might have to submit this. And still I waited, because part of me hoped someone else might notice, might intervene. Vanessa, our director of ops, used to be sharp. We'd worked together during the Umbrasoft integration. She knew how compliance worked. She used to audit my documentation for fun. So when she started skipping weekly alignment calls, dodging direct messages, and rerouting approval flows through Logan's office, I knew. She wasn't asleep, she was aligning, and that made me quietly furious. There was a moment, small, insignificant to anyone else, where it clicked. I'd pinged Vanessa directly. Hey, noticed our legal ops doc is out of sync with the audit trail. Mind if we sync? No response. 3 hours later, Logan's assistant pinged back instead. Per Vanessa, legal ops audit ownership is now centralized to exec office. One sentence, one shift, one line of defense removed. I stared at that message for a full minute before closing my laptop. People think betrayal comes loud. I've learned it often whispers. That weekend I updated Form 4B again, changed the status at the top from draft to preliminary evidence compiled, still unsigned, still sitting in the cloud. But by now it wasn't just about a protocol violation. It was about erosion, quiet erosion of trust, of process, of backbone. I didn't want to destroy anyone. I just wanted the rules to matter again. It was Monday morning when the first real shift came. Angela stopped by my desk, coffee in hand. She didn't sit. You didn't hear it from me, she said softly, but you might want to check the metadata on the Q2 forecast update, the one Logan uploaded last Friday. Then she walked away. Angela had never spoken to me that way before, not as a whisperer, not as an ally. But something in her tone, measured offhand like a signal passed in plain sight, changed the trajectory. That's when I knew. The wind had shifted, quietly, but permanently, and I wasn't the only one who saw the storm coming. I didn't expect the first person to get dragged into the fallout to be someone I still owed a favor. Let's just say the next name in the system audit wasn't Logan's. It was mine. They didn't fire me. They reframed me. Angela from HR called it a soft rotation, a shift in focus to support executive deliverables, while the company realigned strategic priorities. In plain English, I was pulled off all client accounts, cut off from our live systems, and reassigned to a back-channel documentation project that no one asked for and no one would ever read. The request came as a single-line email, no greeting, no context. Just, please transfer the following files to Executive Ops by noon. Below that, a spreadsheet, every document I'd created in the past 2 years. And here's the twist. The spreadsheet wasn't formatted like an internal request. It followed the naming syntax of external audit prep. That's how I knew Logan was cleaning his tracks before he made a mess. I stared at that email for 10 minutes before replying, but I didn't transfer the files. Instead, I opened my private Notion instance and copied over my compliance timeline, the one I'd started building the week Logan first bypassed the SOC2 rollback protocol. The same day he told an engineer on Slack, just delete the field. Legal will figure it out. I'd screen capped that, and archived it, and buried it under an innocuous folder called Lunch Menu Explorations, Q2, because I knew even then he wasn't stupid, just entitled. And entitled, people are dangerous because they assume consequences are for everyone else. Angela called later that afternoon. Her voice was brittle and apologetic. Mark, this isn't a performance issue, it's just optics. The board's nervous about platform liability, and since your name's attached to the original compliance memo I cut in. A pause. Yes. She tried to soften it with a joke about strategic timeouts. I didn't laugh. I asked her to send it to me in writing. That night, I opened the company's Slack logs I'd been scraping weekly via API just in case. I filtered messages by Logan's account ID and keywords override bypass backfill audit flag. Over 200 hits. I read each one slowly. Then I dropped a few into my private archive, especially the one where he told a client-side consultant, "Don't worry about that clause. Our senior team has override power on all data deletions." We didn't. And the clause he dismissed, Addendum 3C, the same clause I'd helped draft. I couldn't sleep that night. Not out of fear, out of clarity. Logan wasn't just burying me, he was deleting the version of the company I had built. And for the first time, I let myself feel something deeper than frustration. Not anger, not yet. It was the quieter thing that comes before anger, betrayal. You spend years teaching a system how to breathe, then watch a brat with legacy access codes rip out its lungs. I opened the oldest file I had on him, his internship onboarding checklist. He hadn't signed the security protocol form. That form was required for every external-facing contributor, even interns. And I knew what that meant. Any data he'd accessed without that form was technically unauthorized under our client agreements, especially if it involved financial tools or deletion permissions. And it had. There was a part of me that hesitated. I won't lie, not because I pitied him, but because I still wanted to believe someone else would intervene. But no one was coming, and I knew then what I had to do. I compiled a new package, one that included 3 Slack screenshots, the missing security form, my original addendum 3C draft, and a short note addressed to our internal counsel. I believe we have an unacknowledged breach exposure tied to the following access incidents. Happy to walk through details privately. I'm not looking to escalate, just protect the platform. It wasn't dramatic, it was deliberate. Before I hit send, I paused. I'm telling this now because I know some of you have been in this exact seat knowing the right move will put you in someone's crosshairs. Honestly, this part's hard to tell, but if you're still here, let me know with a like or a comment, because I need to know I'm not the only one who's ever been here. I sent the email, then I shut my laptop and waited. The response didn't come the next day. It came the day after that from someone I didn't expect. And what they told me, it changed everything. He was already in the conference room when I walked in, shirt pressed tie, too tight, fingers drumming too fast on the tabletop. That's how Logan Greaves tried to look composed, like someone who thought stress could be disguised with expensive cufflinks. The agenda said it was just a compliance sync, but everyone in the room knew better. Angela sat across from him, arms folded, her tablet resting lightly on the table. No notes open, just a quiet recording indicator, blinking red. Ron Patel joined us via video camera, off mic on. Always a bad sign. I opened with a calm review of the documentation we'd submitted to legal, the security override, the procurement timestamps, the vendor login logs. Logan didn't interrupt at first, just watched me jaw tight. But then he leaned forward. "So, what exactly are you suggesting?" he said, voice steady, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "That I intentionally bypassed a compliance block on a client-side integration." I didn't flinch. "I'm not suggesting anything, Logan. I'm just reading the access logs you signed off on and reminding you of the clause in Section 12.4. Any unauthorized deployment during a flagged audit cycle constitutes individual liability, not departmental." His eyes flickered, a half-second delay. Not confusion, calculation. There it was. 2 months ago, I would have second-guessed myself here, worried that I was overreaching, that I'd gone too far. But not today. Because this time, I had everything in writing. The vendor contract. The emergency access email forwarded from his assistant. The Slack message where he told engineering, "Just push it, I'll cover the policy mess later." He didn't know I'd been archiving everything. That habit started last year after a director in our Canadian region got quietly let go. He'd overridden protocol during a product beta rollout, same as Logan, but back then I didn't have the proof in time. I never forgot the way he cleared out his office cardboard box, forced smile, a single email to his team saying thanks for the ride. This time, I wasn't going to be the one packing the box. Angela spoke next, calmly, directly. "Logan, just to clarify, did you initiate the access change manually or delegate it to IT?" There was a long pause. "I don't recall," he said finally, too carefully. "I'd have to review." That was the exact wrong answer. You never forget a manual override. Ron's voice came through the speaker. "I recommend we hold on external disclosures for now, but internal documentation needs to be locked today. Mark send me the memo and chain of custody summary by 3 p.m. I nodded. Logan's fingers started drumming again. And maybe this is petty, but I remember the sound of his shoes when he stormed out. Loud, stiff, too fast, like someone trying to outrun a consequence. Honestly, that moment shook me more than I admitted. I'd waited so long to feel something like justice, and yet, when it came, it felt quiet, heavy, not triumphant, just necessary. If you've ever had to stay quiet while someone like that called the shots, leave a comment. Let me know I'm not the only one who held their ground. The moment the door closed behind him, Angela looked up at me. "You knew he'd try this," she said. "I did," I replied. "I just didn't expect him to make it so easy." I was already drafting the internal report in my head, but my next move wasn't about documentation. It was about who else had seen what Logan did and who had stayed silent. And that's where my real leverage was waiting. Because one of them owed me, and I was about to collect. I hadn't brought that old leather briefcase to the office in almost a year. 9 years I'd carried it. Worn edges, cracked handles, scuffed corners. People used to ask why I didn't just upgrade, but I never let anyone touch it. Because inside that beat-up case wasn't just paper. It was proof. Things I didn't trust to the cloud. Things I didn't want edited, redacted, or conveniently misplaced. That Monday I carried it into the meeting like I used to. Logan was already in the room, sprawled in one of the good chairs like he owned it. His eyes flicked to the case. "What's that? Some kind of relic?" I didn't answer. I placed it on the table and popped the latch. From inside, I pulled a printout vendor meeting notes from Q4 last year. The meeting Logan skipped. The one where he approved a $1.3 million contract without oversight. I slid it across the table. Start with page 3. It gets interesting. The legal counsel sitting next to him leaned forward. Logan didn't move, just stared at the page like it had teeth. That briefcase, something no one ever noticed, had just become the quietest explosion in the room, and I didn't need to say a word. The document spoke louder than any accusation ever could. It felt still. Not satisfying, not yet. Just like something had finally returned to its rightful place. Then I pulled another file from the case. This one was a draft agreement with handwritten notes in red ink, Thomas's notes. Dated March. It read, "Hold until Mark approves. Do not initiate transfer." That transfer still hadn't happened, but Logan had already signed a replacement deal. He looked up. "You weren't supposed to see that version." I kept my voice level. "You weren't supposed to sign anything." No drama, no raised voice, just truth laid flat on the table. The attorney began scribbling something on his tablet. Logan looked at me like he'd just seen a reflection of himself he wasn't ready for. They thought power meant silence, but I had something they couldn't revoke: their own words, in ink, on record. I hadn't moved yet, but something had cracked. If you've ever held on to something that seemed useless until the day it saved you, leave a comment. I want to know what your version of that old briefcase was. They thought I was waiting, but what I was really doing was watching them build their own collapse one signature at a time. You'll want to see what I do with it next. I knew Thomas Greaves wasn't stupid, just arrogant enough to think his tracks were covered, but I didn't need him to trip. I just needed him to keep walking like no one was watching. 3 days after Logan's suspension was quietly lifted, Angela Rowe messaged me a single line. "Your old compliance brief resurfaced in legal review. Thought you should know." That's when I knew it had begun. The clause I had buried inside that quarterly audit, the one referencing discretionary override limitations under Article 6.2b. It was real, but dormant. It wasn't supposed to be tested until Q4. But Logan had been greedy. He'd escalated a vendor switch without routing it through procurement, assuming no one would care if he fast-tracked something for the Greaves family fund. Except the vendor had ties that left a trail, and that trail lit up the clause. Ron Patel, our external legal advisor, called it a procedural ghost mine. Not illegal, he said, but definitely actionable, especially if someone wanted to press the ethics board. And I did. I sat quietly in the compliance room as they reviewed Thomas's digital sign-offs. Every approval he'd ever made for Greaves Foundation-backed projects now flagged with a soft warning, reviewed under 6.2b ethics clause. One of the directors turned to me, eyebrow raised. "You didn't author this clause, did you?" I looked him dead in the eye. "Not officially." They didn't press. I hadn't touched the white ceramic coffee mug since the night I left it on my desk, right after Logan told me to know my place. It had stayed there untouched, chipped along the rim from when I slammed it down without thinking. This morning, I picked it up again. The stain ring was still on the desk. I didn't wipe it off. Sometimes you leave things exactly as they are, so the silence becomes evidence. By Thursday, Thomas was walking faster through the halls, not speaking as much. Vanessa Jordan, our flagship client, had asked for a full reconciliation of every philanthropic disbursement tied to the firm. That was code for someone told her something. She didn't email Thomas, she emailed me directly, her exact words, "Mark, I trust your judgment. If there's something I need to see, don't redact it." I forwarded the request to legal. Then I walked into Thomas's office. He looked up, eyes bloodshot. "I assume you're here to gloat." "No," I said calmly. "I'm here to remind you I haven't done anything yet." He stood, jaw tightening. "You think you can threaten me?" I just smiled. "I think I can survive you. That's all I need." He didn't respond, but that silence. That was the first time I saw it, the beginning of fear. I'll admit I didn't expect Logan to panic so fast, but once Vanessa froze her contract and requested an internal audit, Thomas pulled Logan from all active accounts. They didn't make an announcement, but the Slack channels told the story. Logan's name vanished from project threads overnight, and the clause it kept spreading. I'd written it carefully, so it triggered retroactive compliance checks, like a quiet fire burning backward through time. I wish I could say I felt triumphant, that I toasted something that night. But truthfully, I went home, set the mug down on the counter, and stared at my inbox until 1 a.m. Because now came the real choice. Do I let the fire burn quietly and walk away with my dignity? Or do I open the blinds and show the whole city who really started it? I thought I was almost done, but then a name appeared in the audit that changed everything, a name I wasn't prepared to see. And once I opened that file, I couldn't close it again. They thought I was bluffing. Even as the internal system started flagging delays on vendor compliance certifications, no one in the executive circle saw the string I was pulling, especially not Logan. He was too busy trying to fast-track his offshore logistics trial, an idea I had quietly poisoned from day one by documenting every deviation from internal procurement policies. But this wasn't about paperwork anymore. This was about the envelope. The same envelope I'd kept tucked in the third drawer of my desk, behind an old laminated org chart from 2019. Inside was a printed copy of a clause Logan had approved himself 2 years ago, Clause 14.7. It was one of those blanket risk disclosures legal always stuffed into project proposals, usually ignored unless things exploded. Well, they just did. The language was surgical. Any unapproved procedural bypass resulting in reputational or financial harm to contracted partners will trigger immediate executive liability review. Thomas had signed off on it too. Back then, it was meant to hold suppliers accountable. They never thought it could be turned inward. That clause was my scalpel. I met with Vanessa Jordan first. The moment she saw the documentation trail I'd assembled, the Slack pings, the redlined agreements, the ignored escalation requests, she went very still. "Are you saying this wasn't just incompetence?" she asked slowly. "No," I replied. "I'm saying it was orchestrated recklessness, and you're the one who can confirm the fallout." She didn't say much after that, but I noticed she stopped defending Logan in cross-functional meetings, and more importantly, she pulled her team's budget approvals from his pet initiative, quietly, cleanly. Next came Angela Rowe, the compliance lead, who once told me, "Mark, you're one of the few people who actually reads the vendor contracts." I invited her to coffee-neutral ground. No files, no dramatics. Just a simple question. Do you want to see what Clause 14.7 really protects? She didn't answer, but she showed up at legal 2 hours later requesting an internal pre-audit. That was the first spark. The internal memo from legal hit the Slack channel on a Thursday evening. A benign subject line, preliminary risk scope, vendor path A32. But I knew it was the first domino. Ron Patel, our outside legal advisor, was copied, and when Ron gets involved, the board starts paying attention. I didn't say a word in the thread, just reacted with a thumbs-up emoji. That emoji became a signal. People started watching my channel more closely after that. Old teammates I hadn't heard from in months messaged things like, "You okay?" and saw the thread. Respect. But here's the thing I wasn't celebrating. There's a kind of numbness that comes when you've played every move with surgical precision and it's finally working. It doesn't feel like a win. It feels like standing at the edge of a rooftop, realizing how long you've been planning to jump. Was I hoping they'd apologize, that Thomas would call me into his office and say, "You were right all along," that Logan would grow up, admit fault, and step down with grace? I don't know. Maybe part of me was. But that wasn't the motive anymore. What I really wanted, what I had always wanted, was for the system to see it. For every ignored warning, every back-channel dismissal, every instance where truth was framed as disloyalty, to be documented, audited, and preserved, not for vengeance, for proof. That was the shift. Not revenge, not even redemption. Just the quiet power of saying, "It happened, and you can't pretend it didn't." The symbolic object in my hand wasn't the envelope anymore. It was my company badge. I found myself flipping it over between my fingers one night while watching the memo go viral inside Slack, a dumb little rectangle of plastic. But it had opened every door I once worked to earn. Now it felt like a silent witness. I stood by my window that night, staring at the city badge in hand, wondering how many others had been forced out quietly, without proof, without recourse, wondering what they would have done if they had one clause, one document, one ally who believed them. What would you have done? When Friday came, the board summoned a closed-door review. I wasn't invited, obviously, but I didn't need to be. Everything I'd planted had already taken root. The emails, the Slack trails, the quiet testimonies from operations vendor relations compliance. That night, Logan's access badge failed at the security gate. I heard from Angela quietly. He's been suspended pending review. CEO's calling it a neutral leadership rotation. But we know what this is. I didn't reply. Instead, I walked to my desk, opened the drawer, and pulled out the envelope one last time, ran my finger across the seal. Then, I set it on fire in the break room sink. No dramatics, just closure. But I wasn't finished. Not yet, because Thomas hadn't moved. And until he did, the truth still sat incomplete. So, what exactly was the final piece Thomas couldn't afford anyone to see? That's what came next. The ink on the audit report hadn't even dried when Thomas Greaves stormed into the boardroom, his phone still in his hand, screen glowing with an email from Vanessa Jordan. I had timed it to hit his inbox 30 seconds before he opened the door, just long enough for panic to register, but not enough for him to spin a defense. He was sweating. That part surprised me. The man always looked composed even when lying. But now his face had that blotchy red tone that used to creep in when someone dared challenge his authority in front of clients. "You blindside me like this," he said, voice low, teeth clenched. I didn't move. The report went to the board. "Not you. You'll want to be in your seat for this." Angela Rowe Compliance was already there, quiet, stern, deadly. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The binder in front of her was labeled plainly, Client Misrepresentation, Internal Financial Risk, Tier 1 Escalation. The same folder Thomas had signed off on 18 months ago when we red flagged a junior director for inflating projections. Back then he called it standard procedure. Now I could almost hear him choking on those words. But this wasn't about projections. It was about a symbolic object sitting in front of me, a worn metal flash drive. The same one Thomas had sneered at in our last one-on-one. "You still carry that thing around like it's a badge," he'd joked. He didn't know I had rebuilt the contents, recovered every deleted file, every Slack message showing that Logan Greaves had been falsifying performance reports and backdating contract renewals on the international licensing account, then pinning it on my division when projections slipped. When I slid the drive across the table, it made a small clink against the boardroom glass. The sound wasn't loud, but in the silence it landed like a gavel. "This is everything I said. From the internal approvals you backdated to the vendor delays Logan blamed on us. Every policy clause you thought was safe to bypass." Angela didn't even flinch. "We've had a third party review the metadata. It's legitimate. The timestamps show intentional manipulation." Thomas sat. He didn't say another word for the next 3 minutes. He didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. He just stared, probably calculating what could still be salvaged. Whether Ron Patel from legal would still pick up his calls, whether Logan had left enough evidence to take the fall alone. But the most satisfying part, this wasn't public yet. No headlines, no dramatic firings, just slow suffocation. Policy clauses, audit trails, contract violations, one after another. "I assume you want something," he finally said, trying to regain control. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table like he used to do when asserting dominance. "I want this to end clean. Logan resigns. You take a sabbatical before the quarter ends. No retaliation. Full release agreement in writing. And the client portfolio returns to my team." He almost laughed. "You think you can dictate terms?" I looked at Angela, then back at him. "You're not in a position to negotiate. You're just the last to realize it." What I didn't say, but what I made sure he saw, was that the drive wasn't the only copy. There were backups. One with Ron Patel. One encrypted in the compliance archive under Angela's custody. One sent anonymously to Vanessa Jordan. Because this wasn't about job security anymore. It was about dignity. About reclaiming control from the man who thought he owned the rules because he signed them. He finally spoke. "And what do you get out of this A title?" I smiled. "No, I get to leave on my terms, not yours." That was the true motive. I didn't want his title. I didn't want revenge that burned the whole house down. I wanted acknowledgement, proof that I wasn't crazy, that all those moments I second-guessed myself, questioned whether I was being paranoid, were real. That symbolic flash drive, scratched old half-forgotten, was the physical embodiment of that journey. I'd carried it in my pocket for nearly 2 years without knowing it still mattered. And now it was my final chess piece. By the time the boardroom emptied, I didn't feel triumphant, just steady. And maybe that's all I'd ever wanted, not to win, just to stop feeling powerless. Of course I hadn't shown them everything yet, not the exit clause I had quietly inserted into the Hong Kong vendor contract a year ago, not the handshake deal with Vanessa that guaranteed me first rights if the firm spun off any of the core business lines. That would come next. Because while Thomas was busy assembling his damage control team, I was already 3 steps ahead, papers filed, accounts flagged, and the last clause activated. They still didn't know about the exit clause I'd embedded in the Hong Kong vendor contract, or the side letter Vanessa signed that handed me first rights if any division got spun off. That silence in their boardroom, it wouldn't last long, not once they realized what had just been set in motion. By the time they reached for the brakes, I'd already cut the lines. The final piece fell into place during a quiet Thursday afternoon, the kind of day that pretends nothing is coming. It started with a message from Angela Rowe. She had forwarded me a Slack thread she wasn't supposed to have access to. I read it twice, then a third time. Thomas had looped in his son, Logan, and the general counsel, Ron Patel, discussing how to retroactively reclassify several of my signed vendor contracts as unauthorized commitments. It wasn't just unethical, it was insurance. If anything came out, they were setting me up as the fall guy. I stared at the screen pulse steady. This was what I'd been waiting for. The moment their self-protection instinct would become their own tripwire. Because a month earlier, I had triggered a routine compliance review using our own Q3 vendor escalation clause. Quiet, standard, no red flags. But I had coded the escalation to include all outstanding renewal threads with one subtle filter. Any vendor marked with legacy override tags would be pulled into legal audit. And that's where Logan had been sloppy. He thought he could overwrite approval history in the Slack channel, replacing my name with his on several renewal decisions. But our system didn't work like that. Every change to those logs generated a diff layer hash, encrypted, immutable. Even IT didn't have overwrite rights. Only visibility, and I had the snapshots saved offline, timestamped, and intact. I met with Angela in person the next morning. We didn't speak at first. I simply slid over a single printed sheet, a crosswalk of Slack message IDs with audit log discrepancies. It took her less than 10 seconds to understand. Her eyes met mine. "You planned for this." "No," I said. I just stopped hoping they wouldn't. By noon, the internal review committee had opened a confidential inquiry. Ron Patel was locked out of the system by 2:43 p.m. Logan's badge was deactivated the next day. Angela never smiled. She didn't need to. But Thomas, he wasn't going quietly. He called an emergency board meeting and tried to spin the narrative claimed I had gone rogue, weaponized policy, acted out of vengeance. He used that word. I didn't interrupt. I waited. Then I slid my old Montblanc pen across the table. The one Thomas gave me 7 years ago after landing the Owens Tech contract. The same pen he personally engraved with my initials and the words, "Always handle it quietly." I had documented everything. The pattern of internal policy abuse, the undeclared vendor holdings, the reclassification attempts, the silence protocols enforced on mid-level compliance staff. And then I added one final page the NDA Logan had tried to slip into a vendor renewal retroactively granting the Greaves family direct equity in exchange for stability. That's when the room turned. Not all at once. Just enough heads tilting, enough pens dropping, enough eyes narrowing to know the center had shifted. I stood slowly calm. You asked why I was documenting so obsessively. Thomas said nothing. I gestured to the files. Because someday I knew you'd try to blame me for something you did. I just didn't know which crime you'd pick. I walked out without looking back. But as I passed the hallway, I caught a glimpse of the original policy binder, the one from 2015, still shelved under glass. Inside was Clause 17.4, the clause I had written, the one that made vendor equity conflicts an automatic termination event. No exceptions. And I realized something I hadn't let myself admit until that moment. This wasn't about revenge. It was about finally being able to breathe in a building where silence had been weaponized. But that wasn't the final move. That was next. And when it landed, it wouldn't just end their careers, it would rewrite the memory of mine. I didn't feel anything when Logan resigned. No triumph, no thrill. Just the same silence that had followed me for months. It was a quiet exit. His father's PR team made sure of that. A brief announcement about new opportunities, no mention of the compliance findings, or the failed partnership that triggered the review. But I had seen the report. I knew what was buried in the footnote's failure to disclose conflict of interest, mishandling of privileged client data, internal threats logged and archived. Thomas Greaves didn't fight it. He didn't defend his son. He just let him fall. And maybe that was the real punishment. Angela and I never talked about what we'd done in plain terms. The paper trail was clean, but we both knew the game we played. I'd never forget her voice in that final message, "Congratulations. I never doubted you." Just 5 words. But they hit harder than applause. Thomas was removed from day-to-day operations a week later. Health reasons. Another soft lie. I'd heard from Ron that the board had finally called for an independent legal review. Vanessa Jordan, the client they tried to silence, made sure their next big deal collapsed. She refused to renew their retainer and pulled the rest of her portfolio from Greaves Consulting. That loss alone cost the firm 7 figures. The night all of this finalized, I found myself in the same garage where it began. 3rd level, northeast corner. The rusted railing where Logan had once cornered me, voice-low threats veiled in sarcasm. I remember gripping my keys tighter that day, wondering if I'd made a mistake by standing up. This time I just stood there quietly, hand resting on the cool metal. My badge, deactivated months ago, was still clipped to my old work bag. I held it in my palm, now the edges worn, the logo barely visible. It wasn't just plastic. It was what I'd survived, what I'd outlasted. I dropped it into the trash can on my way out. There was no ceremony, no dramatic exit, just closure. 2 weeks after Logan resigned, I quietly signed my separation agreement. No NDA, no settlement drama. Just a final page with my name on it and the end of that chapter. People ask if I regret it, burning the bridge, torching the path behind me. The truth is, I never wanted revenge. I wanted safety, dignity. I wanted the next woman who walked into that office not to be cornered by someone with a famous last name and no consequences. I wanted the rules to matter again. So, no, I don't regret what I did. But I do wonder who I became because of it. There's this voicemail I've never deleted. It's from my dad the day I first got promoted. His voice is warm, proud, steady. "Mark, this is just the beginning. Don't let them change your core." Some days I wonder if I did. I still flinch at calendar invites. I second-guess praise. I think about every email twice before I send it. It's not fear, it's muscle memory, from a war I won but didn't leave untouched. Still, there's peace now. I've started something new, smaller team, tighter mission. We don't have a marble lobby or an international brand name, but we have something better, each other's backs. And when someone asks about Greaves Consulting, I just smile and say, they're not our competition anymore. Because the truth is, they were never the mountain. They were the test. And I passed. If any part of this felt familiar, if you've ever had to stay silent when someone crossed a line or felt alone while holding the truth, then I want you to know, you're not alone. You're not crazy, and you're not powerless. Thanks for listening to my story. Maybe it helps you write yours. And maybe, just maybe this time, they won't see you coming.